How is everybody doing tonight? We're welcome to the strategy room. You are here with the banker next door. I am your host, Dr. Joe Berquist. I trust everybody's out there probably watching a whole lot of football right now. I know um, the Georgia Texas game, I think, is an OT right now, and I know Penn State and Oregon are going to be kicking off here in just a minute. So I appreciate everybody coming in and hanging out with me for a little while on this Saturday night. And I have got a tremendous amount of stuff for us here tonight. I'm going to be kicking it off here in just a moment. We're going to be talking a major BOI update as the court basically shoots down the Corporate Transparency Act of 2022, at least temporarily, but we'll get into that in a minute. But a lot of other great news here this week. We're going to be talking about Elon Musk losing in court for the second time in Delaware. What is the fallout and potential ramifications from that? Intel CEO got the boot this week. Stellantis's CEO got the boot this week. So a lot of different things going on. Obviously, we heard the tragic news of the murder of United Healthcare CEO earlier this week, and just some absolutely shocking news there. But then we also got some job numbers, a lot of job reports information coming up. I'll have a whole bunch of new banking statistics and other things to show to everybody as we kind of move along here. And then I'm going to wrap up at the end of the night. I've got a blog post on basically corporate succession from Bank Director. I also got a couple of new business books that I'm basically going through right now that I'm going to be reviewing. I'm going to share all those with everybody there at the end. So hang around for that little book review at the end there. But first, before we jump into our article, I just want to go over what major economic indicators do we have coming out this week. So this week, so starting on Tuesday, December 10th, we have non-farm productivity coming out at 8:30 a.m. We have unit labor cost also coming out at 8:30 a.m. On Wednesday, December 11th, we have the OPEC monthly report at 7 a.m. We have the CPI for November coming out at 8:30 a.m. And then we have the federal budget balance at 2 p.m. On Thursday, December 12th, we get the core PPI numbers at 8:30, and then we get the regular PPI numbers also at 8:30. And then on Friday, December 13th, we get the export-import price index month over month at 8:30 a.m. So obviously, great inflation numbers will be getting out this week with the CPI and the PPI coming out, and basically what that will mean for the Federal Reserve in terms of the decision making that they get into. Now, we will talk about, and we're going to run through, like I said, some of the kind of bigger news of the week, as it were, and then we'll come back to that thought on kind of what is the Fed going to do with interest rates as we get into the jobs data and the job information that came out. So, but let's jump right in here too. Okay, this article was Court Strikes Down Major New Reporting Requirement for Businesses. Here's what it means. So this was huge, major news here. So Judge Amos Mazant III of the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Texas on Tuesday issued a nationwide injunction halting the implementation of the new requirements under the Corporate Transparency Act. The requirements called for businesses with fewer than 20 employees to provide names, dates of birth, addresses, and other identifying information about its owners. The move was part of a larger effort by the Department of the Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, also known as FinCEN, to crack down on money laundering and other financial crimes. Existing businesses had until January 1st to report such information. But Mazant called the law unprecedented and a drastic departure from history, as it attempted to monitor companies created under state law and with autonomy granted by the states. For good reason. Plaintiffs fear this flanking quasi-Orwellian statute and its implications on our dual system of government, Mazant said in his ruling. Despite attempting to reconcile the CTA with the Constitution at every turn, the government is unable to provide the court with any tenable theory that the CTA falls within Congress's power. Mazant added that despite the deference the courts must give Congress, the Corporate Transparency Act appears likely unconstitutional, and the injunction is warranted. The National Small Business Association, which had filed a separate suit against the law, said in a statement there had been widespread confusion and mass massive concern about the reporting requirements. Yes, absolutely. While this injunction isn't permanent, this is a huge relief to the millions of small business owners across the country who are facing a wildly complex regulatory regime and fines that could exceed $500 per day and up to 2 years in jail, said NSBA President and CEO Todd McCracken in a statement. The NSBA pointed out that while the rule may eventually be permanently overturned, Congress should pass a law repealing the legislation. It is unclear what the incoming Trump administration will do, but experts believe there will be a wide rollback of Biden-era rules and regulations with the change in administration. Some of the people that disagreed with his ruling were Ian Gary, who's an executive director of the FACT Coalition, and also a gentleman named Gary Kalman, who is the U.S. Director of Transparency International, an anti-corruption correlation. So, and it says, while the ownership database is not public, not necessarily. And one of the big problems with this thing is that they are giving access to everybody under the sun who wants to get it. But it also says in here, it will be accessible to law enforcement agents, giving them another tool to locate and crack down on criminal enterprises, or perhaps to harass people. Maybe. I think the big issue here is with the Fourth Amendment. It's invasion of privacy. In other words, law enforcement would not have to get a warrant and then come and get your information as per the rule of law, as per the way it's always been done. No. They could just go into the BOI database, look up all your information, and then get it that way, and never have to go get a warrant, and basically could get all the information they want on you. That's just one issue with this. So it says, as the reporting requirement deadline approached, a survey of professional service providers, provider Walters Clower, found that many businesses were still unsure what to do or hadn't followed the new regulation. 37% of small business owners surveyed said they were waiting until closer to year end to file their ownership information. Additionally, 32% say they were not sure if they were required to submit information, while 12% cited insufficient resources, and 9% believe the rules don't apply to their businesses. So, and then the article just basically finishes up here at the end by basically saying that, the Biden administration over the last 2 years has unveiled a wave of rules and regulations that have altered the relationship between employee and employer, changes that have been met with significant opposition and legal challenges from business groups. Many critics of the changes say they will increase costs and regulatory burdens for businesses. Yes, absolutely. That includes rules focused on limiting the classification of independent contractors, allowing third parties on OSHA inspections, and a rule banning virtually all non-compete agreements finalized by the Federal Trade Commission, but challenged in court. So for all those who don't know about the Corporate Transparency Act that was in 2002, I just want to run through a couple things here. So this was a good article right here, kind of summing up the whole kind of taking us through piece by piece, if you will, through this whole thing as it is unfolded. So Corporate Transparency Act, ongoing litigation, not likely to change year-end filing dates. Now this article was written before we just got this injunction filed by the court. But basically what this says is that after the U.S. Congress enacted the Federal Corporate Transparency Act, the CTA, on January 1st, 2021, a wide range of plaintiffs immediately brought suit against the government challenging its constitutionality. Currently, there are about 14 cases filed in federal court challenging the validity of the CTA. Some reporting companies have watched these cases closely to see if a ruling would change their obligations to making a filing or existing entities by January 1st, 2025. So then we had, after this came in, we had the National Small Business Association filed a lawsuit. So the National Small Business Association versus the U.S. Department of the Treasury is the only case where a trial court was upheld such a challenge. So now let me go over here. So, and this says that, the NSBA filed a lawsuit on March 1st, 2024, and they won their lawsuit. In September, they won this lawsuit with a federal judge ruling that the act is, in fact, unconstitutional, effectively granting the NSBA a victory in their legal challenge against the law. However, this ruling only applies to the NSBA and its members and people, and more importantly, businesses that were members before the lawsuit was filed on March 1st of this year. not all businesses nationwide. But here are some of the key points about the ruling. So there was a decision. So a federal court ruled the Corporate Transparency Act, CTA, unconstitutional in a lawsuit filed by the NSBA. The reasoning: the court found that the CTA exceeded Congress's enumerated powers, particularly regarding the requirement for small businesses to disclose detailed beneficial ownership information. The scope of the ruling: while the court declared the CTA unconstitutional, this ruling only applies to the NSBA and its members, not all businesses nationwide. However, there were a couple lawsuits. There were a couple lawsuits. There were some other cases in here. There was Firestone, and then there was the Community Associations Institute, and basically both of those lawsuits got thrown out. In Firestone, the court only denied the preliminary injunction, but did not dismiss the case entirely. This means that the plaintiffs may later attempt to seek other remedies if they continue to litigate. In Community Associates Institute, it says here basically the court held that the CTA does not compel speech in violation of the First Amendment, and that the CTA's reporting requirements fall within the category of reasonable reporting requirements, which are understood to be constitutional. However, like Firestone, the court only denied the preliminary injunction. The case is now being appealed. So what does this mean? Even though the 11th Circuit Court upheld the trial court's decision and fined the CTA to be unconstitutional, FinCEN is still enforcing the regulations against everyone else. And even if the 11th Circuit were to invalidate the CTA facially, which it just did, Congress may still amend the CTA in accordance with the trial court's decision to ensure it is constitutionally valid. Congress may also pass laws to extend CTA filing deadlines. However, these bills have generally been delayed. So basically, right now, we all have a big reprieve here as far as the beneficial ownership information is concerned. This is a massive, massive win. So excited to hear this. This is such a big thing. There is no doubt, and I think, and I said this before in some of the earlier episodes that I did earlier this year when I reported on beneficial ownership information, and that is that this is a highly, highly unconstitutional act. I cannot believe that Congress passed this law and basically got this into place. I don't think, in typical Congress fashion, I don't think that the Congress people or congressmen and women that voted on this thing really understood what was in this act. Unfortunately, like so many other bills that just kind of come through in the middle of the night, I think that there was a lot of things in this act that were buried in the details that they did not know about, and this is one of the unfortunate side effects of the system that we have with Congress and the way that they write laws and get things approved. But this has been a mess from the word go, and they've created this giant pickle for the FFIEC because they couldn't talk about this thing. And as it said in the article there, what 32% of small business owners didn't understand. 32% said they were not sure what the requirements were. 12% cited insufficient resources. 9% believed the rules didn't apply to them. So there was basically widespread confusion amongst business owners. Most of the business owners that I've personally talked to have no idea what the BOI is or what the requirements are, or what they should do or when they should do it. And that gets back to the heart of the issue here, and that is, the FFIEC, they couldn't really talk about this thing and get the word out, because the more people heard about it, the more they would have been horrified by what this was and what they had to do and what the penalties were. $500 a day or 2 years in jail. I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, that's just like a bad joke. And so they couldn't go around talking about this and getting, bringing widespread awareness, because the more awareness they brought to it, the more legal challenges they brought, and the more people would push back and basically realize how unconstitutional this whole thing is, and would dramatically push back on. They knew this. They knew this. That's why they haven't really talked about it. And yet they were still trying to quietly get this thing through. And they were basically putting it back on, attorneys and CPAs and CFAs and other people to basically and banks, don't worry. The professional service providers, the people in financial services, they'll let, all the business owners know what they have to do. And a lot of that has happened. Um, but like I said, this whole situation has just been crazy that this has gone through. But thank goodness, because I was really frustrated because the National Small Business Association won their lawsuit. The judge ruled that the Corporate Transparency Act was completely unconstitutional. It violated about 7 or 8 amendments in the Constitution. And yet it seemed like nobody was kind of picking up the ball there. It was kind of like, okay, well, a lot of the NSBA members are covered, but nobody else in the country was covered. So it was kind of like, well, who's picking up the ball on this thing? Who's going to run with it and who's going to do something with it? And finally, the 11th Circuit Court, one of the judge down there with some courage, finally picked this thing up and basically said, no, I'm granting it. This thing is totally unconstitutional. I'm going to grant a nationwide injunction, and we're basically going to this thing is going to have its day in court, and we're going to see, what happens here. So now there's still a chance that this thing could prevail and we could all end up having to comply with this by next year. But my gut feeling is that this will go back to Congress. Congress will either scrub this thing or they'll end up making dramatic changes to it. For example, like one of the biggest problems that I have with this is that this database can be accessed by foreign agents, foreign nations can get access to. All they have to do is basically sign up and pay for it. And it's, and it gets back to that, like, well, why does somebody in Germany, why does somebody in China need to know that, like, if you own a little business and you have 10 employees, why does somebody in China need to know, all your information as far as who owns the company, all your personal data? Like why does somebody in Germany or South Korea or wherever, Japan, like why do they need to know this information? They don't. So again, I'm my hope is that if this thing does for some reason become a reality, there will be major changes to it, and it will take out at least a lot of the more horrible stuff to it. But we'll see. We'll have to see what happens. But this is no doubt a major, major win. Thank goodness we at least have an injunction on this. So now everybody can rest easy here over the Christmas holidays, the holiday season, as it were, and then we can go from there. So, okay, so that's the big news there on that. So now let's look at some of the other big news this week. We had this was a big article here in the Wall Street Journal this weekend. So Intel CEO, he was going to save Intel. He destroyed $150 billion in value instead. So Pat Gelsinger was one of the chip pioneers' true believers. And after his rescue strategy failed, the board lost confidence in him. So how does this iconic American company survive? So Intel is a hot mess right now. And this gentleman, Pat Gelsinger, he was with Intel for a long time. He was with this company for decades. He was considered a very talented engineer, had done some really good things there. But I think what happened there, if I was going to venture a little bit of guess here, Intel wanted to get back into the foundry business, but I think they got too far behind, and I think they let that business languish. And I think it really came back to bite them at the end of the day. I think is they tried to get in on the CHIPS Act, and the CHIPS Act, I could do a whole conversation on that. That CHIPS Act was a disaster. And that thing, wait till they go back and take a look at that boondoggle, because it was filled with all this, all these, if you want to call it woke, it's filled with all kinds of woke conditions that you had to meet as far as, hiring guidelines and all this kind of stuff or whatever, and for anybody who doesn't know, building microchips is a very, very difficult thing to do. It is not an easy thing to do. And you need basically scientists, you need highly intelligent people. You cannot just pluck any schmo off the street and basically give them a job making microchips. It just doesn't work like that. And yet that was basically what the government was trying to do, just trying to say, oh, hey, yeah, you can just go hire a whole bunch of people, just pull people off the street and just hire them. And, so, but that, like I said, I digress. That's the CHIPS Act. And what we're talking about here is more Intel and the fact that they fired their CEO this week. So I think the big question with Intel is, do they end up getting split up into two different companies? Do you end up with like a foundry business on one side that just makes microchips? And then do you end up with another business on the other side that basically designs microchips? It becomes kind of like, one of the big microchip designers in the world is called ARM, a British company. And ARM is a really, really good chip designer, chip maker. They don't actually make the physical chips, as it were. They just make the chip designs, and then they'll send it over to like Taiwan Semiconductor, and then Taiwan Semiconductor will actually make the chips, or they'll send the design to Samsung, and Samsung will make the chips, and so on and so forth. So does Intel basically break the company up into multiple parts and then go from there? So and like I said, I have no idea. I don't know the answer to that, but it'll be interesting to see what happens. Okay, and then we had Stellantis. So basically, anybody who doesn't know Stellantis owns Chrysler, and they own Jeep. I think they own Dodge. But so Stellantis CEO, they got rid of their CEO, Afuela. He's out. He's gone. Afuela. It's like my new favorite word. Afuela. But basically, this is, I think, really interesting case perhaps from a managerial perspective. So this guy basically got canned because he was too hardcore on efficiency. He was basically they describe it right here, right off the gun. He had a ruthless focus on efficiency, which made Carlos Tavares a giant of the automotive industry. It was also his undoing at Stellantis. So he resigned Sunday as chief executive officer of the Chrysler owner after losing the confidence of the board and key shareholders. In a statement, the company pointed to the emergence of different views in recent weeks. So I think what made this kind of interesting is that he had basically the confidence of the board as recently as October. And then literally within the last, month and a half or so here, they just did a total 180 and basically said, okay, this guy is out. But he was known as a guy that was big on cost cutting, big on efficiency. He wanted everything to reduce cost. And I think that held him in good stead for a long time. But I think it basically got to a point here where, and I think I think he was playing some other games with the cash flow of the company as well. Like he was trying to boost the cash position of the company toward the end of the year at the expense of a bunch of the vendors which was basically not sitting well with a lot of people in the company because it was straining vendor relationships, straining, union contracts, that kind of thing. And so, again, just not a great situation there. And I think this will make for a good case study one day, and perhaps what not to do and some of the ways that you manage a company. But, so he's out now. And then let's see here. And then this was very interesting. So Elon Musk, his multi-billion-dollar pay package is rejected again for the second time by a judge in Delaware. Tesla's board had argued that a shareholder vote earlier this year addressed the court's previous criticisms. So a Delaware judge upheld her earlier ruling, striking down Elon Musk's multi-billion-dollar pay package, plunging Tesla's board into more uncertainty over how to compensate its superstar chief executive for a decade of work. The court's decision followed a shareholder vote earlier this year approving the pay package for a second time. And I believe Elon got over 70% of the shareholders voted for this pay package. Tesla had argued that the vote addressed many of the court's criticism, and Musk's compensation deal had been flawed partly because of insufficient disclosures to shareholders. But here's what I think is interesting about this case. So it may, again, some people might view this as a victory of sorts for the court. I think that this is a horrible thing, especially for Delaware. So for people who don't know, Delaware is a very unique state. The majority of corporations are basically housed in Delaware. The city of Wilmington in Delaware has, a lot of huge Fortune 5 companies have offices there, or some have headquarters there. You have Navient, the big student loan lender. JP Morgan Chase has a big office there. A lot of companies basically, keep their quote unquote corporate headquarters in Delaware for tax purposes, because you have the bankruptcy court, the corporate bankruptcy courts there in Delaware. So there's a lot of reasons over the years why you would want to be headquartered in Delaware. This is going to cause a major, major problem, and it's going to lose. I believe it's going to lose that competitive advantage for Delaware in terms of the corporate benefits that exist there for a lot of companies. I think a lot of companies are basically going to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to now, because you have other states like Nevada. Who else am I thinking of? Maybe South Dakota, am I thinking of? But you have some other states that have been in more recent years have been kind of muscling in on Delaware's turf, so to speak, as basically being a great place for corporations, especially C corps, to kind of house big, large companies, large C corp companies, to basically house their businesses there and make that the home of their corporate headquarters, so to speak. And so I think this is I think this is a bad thing for Delaware, because look, ultimately Elon's going to get paid somehow. He's going to get his corporate package. I think a lot of this is just literally politics and people trying to score some brownie points on one side of the aisle or the other. And I think ultimately Elon's going to get his money at the end of the day. But I think this is just going to backfire in a big way. And I think a lot of companies are going to look at this and go, you know what? It's just like, companies that have moved out of New York and California. They look at the legal environment, they look at the regulatory environment, they look at the tax environment, and they just go, you know what? This isn't a good spot for my company. Like, I could do much better in other states like the Carolinas or Texas or Alabama or Kentucky, or like I said, North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana. Like, there's dozens and dozens of other states out there that are very business friendly right now, and that's where a lot of people have moved to a lot of other states, and they've moved out of Connecticut, New Jersey, and New York, and a lot of the states in the Northeast, and a lot of states on the West Coast. Oregon, Washington State, California. You've seen this kind of mass exodus of businesses that have gone to just a more friendly environment. A lot have gone to Florida. Why? Because Florida has lower taxes, a lot less regulation. They're very business friendly. And, again, a lot of companies, surprise, surprise, they like states that are very business friendly. So like I said, I think, unfortunately, this is really going to backfire on Delaware in a big way. But we'll see what happens. But so those are some of the bigger stories of the week. And then now I wanted to get into the jobs. Let's talk about some jobs reports here for a minute. So, jobs report for October came out and basically said hiring bounced back with 227 jobs added last month. The October's report had come in, this is November. November's report here. October's report had come in much lower, hurt by hurricanes and the Boeing strike. And here we just see kind of a nice chart. And I think your big takeaway from this chart, if you really look at it going from left to right here, is you just see the deceleration. You see the overall deceleration in jobs just going down here over the last 2 years, and getting down to the abysmal 12,000 jobs that were created in October, which is just nothing. And now they're saying that, we're back to 227,000 jobs. Now, anybody who has watched any of my live streams or any of my other episodes over the course of the last year knows I have been highly, highly critical of the job reports and of the reporting, because, quite frankly, most of the numbers have been BS. Thus, so the job numbers are put out by the BLS, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The Bureau of Labor Statistics back in August did a revision that over 800,000 jobs that the government said had been created were not created. They were all fake. They were non-existent. Were never real, and just poof and vanished away. And the BLS has another major revision that's going to be coming out next month in January. And I would expect you're going to see another major revision, maybe another 800,000 or another million jobs downward that basically did not exist, which is going to revise all these numbers down. Now, this job report, again, follows the pattern of what we have seen for the last, 12 to 18 months. And that is, we get a great headline number, and then next month that number gets revised downward. And that's, for the most part, that has been the pattern of what we've seen. Now, here's the interesting thing. The jobs report was supposedly decent, creating 227,000 jobs, but yet the unemployment rate ticked up. Interesting. Okay. So we had the unemployment rate tick up, and then let's go look at something else here. Private sector job growth slowed in November. So what does that mean for the jobs report? So what are some of the takeaways here? So Private sector job growth was lower than expected at 146,000 jobs in November's ADP National Employment Report. The weakness in manufacturing and small business hiring helped to drag down the results, economists said. The private sector data comes ahead of Friday's U.S. payroll report for November, with economists expecting jobs to rebound after storms and labor strikes dragged down the October report. So slow job growth in some industries helped weigh on private sector job growth in November as investors monitored the labor market for weakness. The ADP National Employment Report showed that private sector payrolls increased by 146,000 jobs in November, less than the 163,000 projected by economists. The results are also down from October's numbers, which were revised down to revised down. That's a shocker, to 184,000 from the originally reported 233,000. Oh, that's interesting. The survey data from the private sector payroll provider showed that manufacturers reduced their headcount by 26,000 in November. So what else do we have here? And let's pop to the next thing here. So this is the job market was better than expected in October. Interesting. Okay. Now here, I think they give us a couple other things. So now let's talk about job openings. So this is according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics on Tuesday, which showed that the number of job openings available increased to 7.7 million in October from 7.4 million the prior month. It was also more than the 7.5 million forecasters had expected, according to a survey. Layoffs, already near historical lows, declined to 1.6 million from 1.8 million. And more people quit their jobs, suggesting they were confident of finding higher wages elsewhere. The monthly JOLTS report added detail to job creation statistics previously reported and the widely reported non-farm payrolls report. The report showed the economy created 12,000 jobs last month, the lowest level since December of 2020, largely due to the impacts from Hurricane Helene and Milton. Despite the encouraging uptick in job openings and downshift in layoffs, there was at least one sign of weakness. Only 5.3 million people were hired, down from 5.6 million in September. The mixed report gave economists the impression that the labor market isn't booming like it was last year, but is still staying afloat. So let's put some of this stuff in context here. So job openings. So they're saying that job openings went up to 7.7 million. What you have to understand is that a couple years ago, we were at 12 million job openings. So we have dropped a considerable amount. I mean, we've dropped over 4 million. That's over 4 million jobs, or at least job openings that have gone away. So now we're down to 7.7 million, which isn't all that great because, as I've also reported on this thing called ghost job postings, and it is estimated that almost half of all the job postings out there are fake. They're not real. They're ghost jobs. So if you take that 7.7 million and cut it in half, and now you're down to like 3.3 million, 3.35 million, it paints a much different picture, doesn't it? Layoffs, are still near historic lows, but they, declined to 1.6 million. So not as much layoffs going on right now, but not as much hiring either. And basically, and then this whole notion about, you had more people kind of quit their jobs this month. Yeah, I think the days of what they called the Great Resignation, I think the Great Resignation are behind us. I think I reported on a couple of weeks ago. We're now in what was it? The Great sit tight or something like that. It had a better name than that, but basically, yeah. But people are basically sitting tight. So, and then the job reports itself, I don't have a breakdown necessarily of November's numbers, but if we look at the last 4, 5, 6 months, or even the last year, what did we see? We saw most of the jobs were going to foreign-born workers, not U.S. citizens, but foreign-born workers. That's where all the jobs were going. All the jobs that were being created were part-time jobs. They were not full-time jobs. So you have many, many people out there right now basically working 2, 3, 4 jobs to try to make ends meet. Not a great situation overall in the economy. Then you look at the fact that of the jobs that were created, basically really good paying white collar full-time jobs, those jobs were decreased by over 100,000 jobs throughout the year. And so what does that tell you? All the jobs were basically part-time jobs. They're all going to foreign-born workers, and really good paying full-time jobs were decreasing. Does that strike you as a healthy labor market? Does that strike you as being a great booming labor market for businesses out there, or for people maybe looking for jobs? So no, it does not. So I am highly skeptical of these job numbers. And, again, we'll have to consider to monitor this. But I would tell people that with the big revision coming in January to BLS, it's likely to be another very large revision to the downside. And, and again, I think that will put another shot in this, further weaken this already weak job market. So now the question becomes, what does this mean for the Federal Reserve? And that takes us right into our next article. So what does the November jobs report mean for the Federal Reserve? So Friday's jobs report bolstered traders' belief that the Federal Reserve will cut its influential interest rate again in December. In November, employers added 227,000 jobs to the economy, and the unemployment rate rose to be in line with expectations. In the wake of the report, traders were pricing in an 87% chance that the Fed will make a quarter-point cut in their meeting on December 17th to the 18th, according to the CME Group's FedWatch tool, which forecasts rate movements based on Fed funds future trading data. That's up from 71% on Thursday and 66% last week. It was already widely expected that the Federal Open Market Committee would move forward with another 25 basis point rate cut in December, and the latest employment report is unlikely to change that. Traders have been especially sensitive to jobs data as the Federal Reserve officials work to balance their fight against inflation with the mandate to keep unemployment low. Concerns about a weakening job market spurred the Fed to cut its influential federal funds rate for the first time since 2020 in September. So, I don't think this job report certainly was not strong enough in any way, shape, or form to basically change the Fed's basically program, if you will, that they have laid out, the script that they have laid out. They are moving forward with this. They're staying on pace. They wanted to bring rates down by 100 basis points by the end of the year. They will complete that. They're gonna make another 20, at least my opinion. They're going to make another 25 basis point rate cut here at the meeting on December 17th, 18th. And that will basically, like I said, bring the federal funds rate down by 100 basis points. Then I think the Fed is going to pause. I think they're going to pause in January, and I don't think they're going to do anything. And I think the inflation numbers that come out next week, like I said at the beginning of the show tonight, we're going to get the PPI and the CPI numbers next week. And I think depending on what those numbers show, if inflation continues to accelerate, like what we've been seeing for the last 3 or 4 months, with these inflation data, is that basically the overall headline number is staying kind of within expectations at 2.6, 2.8%, 3%, 3.2%, somewhere in those neighborhoods. But the core numbers have been accelerating, not dramatically, but they've been the core numbers, the core PCE, the core PPI, the core CPI numbers have all been going back up steadily for the last 4 months, which tells you that, inflation is not beaten. Inflation is continuing to be a problem, but more importantly, that inflation it's not going back down to 2%, which is where the Fed wants it to be. And it has settled, furthermore, it has settled in well above 2%, even closer to 3% is where inflation seems to be settling in at right now. That's perhaps even more troublesome. So like I said, we're going to see what this economic data brings here in the next couple of weeks, especially on this inflation data. And then that, coupled with this jobs report, is going to have a lot of bearing on what the Fed basically continues to do come January. Now, the other wild card here is in January, we have a new president coming in. We have a new administration coming in. What are they? Obviously, there's been some talk about, perhaps President Trump going at Jeremy Powell a little bit rough, basically going at him and maybe wanting Jeremy Powell to be more aggressive with rate cuts. And maybe Jeremy Powell may not want to do that, but like I said, we'll have to see. I think that's kind of one of the wild cards, if you will, at the moment, as to what happens and how that situation plays out. But like I said, at least for the short term, I think we can feel pretty confident in the fact that you will see another quarter point rate cut this month, and then we'll get a pause in January, and then we'll have to see what happens, February, March, April, May next year. I think that the Fed's plan will hold true, and that is that they will continue to bring interest rates down over the next 12 to 18 months. But again, we'll have to see how that plays out. So. And then just another article here, Fed likely to cut rates again this month as 2025 view grows more cloudy. The U.S. Federal Reserve appears likely to lower benchmark interest rates again later this month after cutting interest rates at its previous two meetings. The central bank's plan for rates in 2025 are anyone's guess. The Fed is due to update its quarterly economic projections at its next meeting, December 17th, 18th, and their latest quarterly projections released in September. Members of the Rate-Setting Federal Open Markets Committee held a median view of the central bank's benchmark rate ending 2025 at 3.4%, or 125 basis points of cuts from the current levels. Yet that view has become more clouded, with inflation remaining stubbornly above target, the jobs market showing few cracks, and a new administration moving into the White House. Market watchers expect the forthcoming projections will show a view of higher rates for longer as inflation has proven more resilient than expected. And while hiring is slowing and job openings are trending downward, joblessness remains steady. The balance of risks is shifting toward less rate cuts next year, said Oren Klatchkin. Am I saying that right? Yeah, Klatchkin, a financial markets economist with Nationwide. They'll be navigating a bit in the dark, so we think they'll take it slowly. Now, let me ask you this. What would be a big rationale? And here you can kind of see this is the federal funds rate here on this chart here. We can see here we kind of plateaued for a little while, and now they've been bringing it down for the last couple months. You kind of see that here on the tail end right side of this chart here. But what would be a major rationale for why, as a country, we would want to bring the federal funds rates down? National debt. We are paying over $1 trillion in interest right now, in just interest alone, just to service the national debt. So, and that is the largest line item of any expense that the government has right now. That is larger. We're paying, again, over $1 trillion to finance just to finance the interest on the national debt. I mean, that's crazy. And so in order to make that more palatable, what you would want to do is you would want to have interest rates come down to therefore reduce the amount of interest that has to be paid on the national debt. That's one way to try to alleviate some of the burden on the federal government right now. So while that would help the country as a whole, inflation's a big deal. Inflation is going to be the fly in the ointment, if you will. It's going to kind of mess this whole thing up. And then the other thing you have to consider here is treasury rates. I've spoke before in the live, a couple of the past live streams that basically, as the Fed has been bringing down the federal funds rate, the 10-year treasury rate has been going up. So the Fed brought the federal funds rate down 75 basis points, but the 10-year treasury has gone up almost 62 basis points. But it has retreated a little bit this week, back down to like 4.25. It was looking like it was getting ready to jump to push up against 4.5%, but it's backed off a little bit, at least for the moment. But basically, what's that doing is it's basically creating like a break-even bar, if you will, like it's nullifying the effects of the Fed's rate cuts. So that's what I think part of the issue for the Fed is going to be. They're going to, like I said, they're going to continue to cut rates. They're going to cut another 25 basis points this week, or this month rather, and then they're going to have to sit back and go, well, is that working? Is it doing anything? Because if the 10-year treasury continues to go up, those rate cuts basically have no effect. So that's another part of this that they're going to have to take. They're going to have to weigh and measure that and see if they can figure out, what's the best, course of action. Whether, the best course of action might be to just stand pat and sit back and wait a few months, and maybe even wait 4, 5, 6 months and just see what happens. See what happens with the economy. I do think there's a very good chance we could be in for some. I think this is going to be a very rocky year. I've said before, I think the new Treasury Secretary who's coming in, I think Janet Yellen has done a horrible, horrible job at the U.S. Treasury. I think the manipulation and the things that she has done over there have been horrendous. And she has left the new Treasury Secretary, Besson. That gentleman, I would not want his job because he has a huge mess that he is going to have to clean up over there. And like I said, I do not envy him. So like I said, I think we are in for a little bit of a rocky year economically. We'll see what happens. So, okay, I want to switch gears for a minute here. And I want to go into something that's a little bit off topic. And I'm not going to get huge into this, but I wanted to touch on this for a minute. So the Senate, the United States Senate, they issued their report this week. This was the United States Senate, the COVID Select Committee issued their final, they concluded their 2-year investigation on COVID and basically put out this report. Now, this right here, what we're looking at is basically a quick summary of the report. And basically it goes into, the origins of said virus, gain of function research, Echo Health Alliance, NIH failures. Basically what it says is that, everything the government did was, I'll provide the synopsis real quick. Everything the government did was wrong. This was all a major catastrophe. And a lot of the stuff in here that we were put through was total BS. And so all I'm saying to people is because again, I'm trying not to get censored here by YouTube. I don't know. I'm not 100% sure what they will or will not block here, but this is the report itself. It's 550 pages. Anybody can go out and download this. And I would highly recommend that if you have not seen this or are not aware of it, go look in and check it out now. But what I was interested in this for this podcast and this particular episode was that I wanted to see how many jobs had or how many businesses had failed because of the pandemic. And basically because we never really got that number. And now we finally have at least an approximation of that number, which is over 160,000 businesses basically closed because of the pandemic and because of the government lockdowns and everything that happened. And 160,000 small businesses out there basically got crushed by not just the pandemic, by the government's actions during this pandemic. And that is just a catastrophe that took place. And I guess in a certain way, I'm glad we finally got the number so that we could kind of analyze and look at this and try to figure, make sense of kind of what happened looking back. But this whole thing, I would just say that this whole report is it's highly disturbing. It's highly disturbing. And what bothers me about it is that they kind of wrap it up with a bow on it and basically say, all the government was completely wrong and they lied about everything and abused citizens' rights and did all this horrible stuff. But we're not going to recommend any criminal investigations. No criminal investigations. Nobody goes to jail. And it gives me flashbacks to the financial crisis in 07, 08, 09, when it's basically like, the banks caused all this, they crashed it. And, but none of the CEOs, none of the heads of these banks, none of them are going to jail. Nobody's going to be held accountable for anything. All of the regulators all the people at the rating agencies that basically rubber stamped everything and were totally asleep at the wheel. No consequences. Nobody's getting fired. Nobody's getting held accountable. Nothing's happening to nobody. And this is like the same thing. It's like the same thing all over and over again. And it's like I always say, we live in the era of unaccountability. I truly believe that a lot that happens today is because there's no accountability. No one ever gets nailed. But what do people get nailed for? It's like I said, it's disheartening. But and again, like I said, I'm not gonna because that's not really what this podcast is designed to cover. Like I said, I was more interested from the perspective of this report, I was more interested in the number of businesses that permanently closed because of the pandemic and because of the government's actions. So that was really what my curiosity was in looking at this report. But I would highly recommend people go out, take a look at this report, check it out, and maybe learn a few things that you didn't know. So, okay. Let's go on to some other things here. So what do we got here? We've got holiday spending in 2024 may hit a record $989 billion. What will it mean for real estate, particularly retail real estate? So despite negative consumer sentiment about inflation and the cost of goods, the 2024 holiday shopping season is largely expected to be a robust one. The National Retail Federation is predicting winter holiday spending this year will grow between 2.5% and 3.5% compared to 2023, or between $975 billion and $989 billion in November and December. Retail sales in those months last year totaled $955 billion. If those expectations pan out, 2024 would be another record year for holiday spending. But experts say this year's holiday sales may not significantly move the needle for retail real estate because the market for space is so tight. Economists who track the retail and retail real estate industries note that while spending is overall expected to be up this year, the yearly increase in sales has waned since the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, when consumers were spending more on goods instead of services, travel, entertainment, and other categories. So, yeah, I think that's true there. So, but again, I always get into the inflation caveat here. Like what, the inflation caveat of basically, you're spending more money to buy less goods. So while these retail numbers go up, that's great, but it's basically, if they're expecting the numbers to grow 2.5% to 3.5%, that's basically the rate of inflation. So, that all the sales are really doing is keeping up with inflation. I don't think people are really buying more stuff this year than last year, but they're spending more. They're going to have to spend more money to buy the same amount, if not less stuff than they did the last couple of years. So I think you have to think about that a little bit before you get all excited about seeing these higher retail numbers. You got to kind of think about what that means. Curiously, I think about the massive amount of credit card debt and the buy now, pay later debt that we already have out there on the books for American consumers. And I just look at it, I'm looking at like, well, credit cards are like basically got to be almost tapped out. I mean, there's 1.4 $1.5 trillion in credit card debt. There's another $500 billion in buy now, pay later debt. I mean, at what point does the American consumer, and again, in savings are like, savings are down to like, 4%. Less than 4%. I think like 40% of people in this country don't have, $400 for a major emergency. If some kind of major emergency expense comes up, they don't even have $400 in their savings account to cover it. Yet somehow magically everyone's able to go out and spend at Christmas time. So I don't know. So hopefully, hopefully it's not the case. Maybe the consumer still has a little bit more steam in there. I don't know, but we'll have to see. But like I said, just wanted to kind of share at least those projections for the holiday numbers so far. Okay. A record number of businesses formed during the pandemic. Now some are struggling. So private payroll data released by ADP Wednesday showed that companies with between 20 and 49 employees reported cutting payrolls by 29,000 jobs. A slowdown in small business hiring could indicate the record number of new businesses formed during the pandemic are struggling, said an economist. A record number of businesses were formed in July of 2020, but persistent inflation and high interest rates make it harder for many to hire or sustain. So new businesses sprung up at a record level during the pandemic, but may now be faltering in the face of economic pressures. Private payroll data released by ADP Wednesday shows that firms with 500 employees or more showed the strongest employment gains, while companies with between 20 and 49 employees reported cutting payrolls by 29,000 jobs. The slowdown in small business hiring could indicate the record number of new businesses formed during the pandemic are struggling. Gains were driven by large firms. Small businesses are getting squeezed. New business formation soared in recent years, and most of those businesses are now failing in the wake of higher costs and interest rates. That means the assumptions made about gains in employment due to those new businesses will be revised down. So then you see from this chart here, kind of we had this huge spike in business formations up to over 500,000 new business formations, and that has kind of slowed down to about 424,000 business formations. But yes, I think like historically, right, when you look at the numbers, 90% of all small businesses that are formed fail within the first 2 years. 90%. And that's been the historic trend for, 70 years. And then it gets even crazier. So 90% of all businesses started fail within the first 2 years. And then of the 10% that make it the first 2 years, 90% of that 10% will fail within 7 years. So if you're a small business owner and you make it past 7 years in business, you are one of the rare. You're basically like the top 1%, one of the rare few that managed to hang on and survive. That's the true numbers. That's the true failure rate of small businesses. So it's not any surprise that if you had a lot of businesses that were started here in 2020 are now really beginning to struggle at this point, because like I said, they're getting past that kind of date of when, like I said, a lot of companies would normally fall out anyway. So, but interesting stuff to look at. Is piling debt holding you back from saving more for retirement? It is for many Americans. So nearly half of Americans, 46%, who wished they had saved more for retirement, said that debt such as credit cards, student loans, and car loans kept them from doing so. Some 62% said they were balancing multiple financial goals but don't know what to focus on. Experts suggest prioritizing earning your employer's 401k match if offered, and then making payments on your debt, focusing on paying down higher interest rate debt first. So basically, let's look at the respondents here. So about 46% of respondents who wished they had saved more for retirement said non-housing debt, basically auto loans, credit cards, student loans, kept them from saving more. Alliance's 2024 annual retirement survey found millennials, 56%, were most likely to struggle to save for retirement due to non-housing related debt, compared to Gen Xers, 50%, and boomers at 35%. And it's not just non-housing debt that's impacting people's ability to save for retirement. Of respondents who had wanted to save more for retirement, more than 1/3, 34%, said that their housing debt, Alliance refers to housing debt as a mortgage or rent, was hindering their retirement savings. Limiting retirement savings because of debt can leave you vulnerable to outliving savings in retirement. Yes, absolutely. Well, part of the problem is that one of the biggest things that we've seen over the last couple of years is that obviously the cost of rent surged. We saw those inflationary pressures on rent, and we saw that massive surge in the cost of rent, and that is eating up a lot of people's budgets right now. Mortgages, if you bought a new house in the last couple of years at much higher interest rates at 6-7%, obviously that's eating into that's putting a much larger debt load and eating into your monthly budget and your monthly cash flow. So again, it's interesting to keep an eye on this. I would also say that there's nothing really surprising here with this, because younger generations tend to struggle more. I mean, they're just, they're in their 20s and 30s and 40s, and they're just getting out into the working world. They have a lot more debts because maybe, like I said, maybe they bought a house, maybe they're still paying off student loans, maybe they have kids. They got to have more cars, maybe bigger SUVs, that kind of thing. So their bills are a lot more, and that will get better for them as life goes on. The kids grow up, they go off to college. So now you don't have a lot of the expenses that you're paying with that. Maybe you can get smaller cars, pay off some of the debt that you had. And now as you get older, hopefully as you age, you get into your late 40s, your 50s, early 60s, the prime earning years of between 45 and 65, hopefully prime earning years of your career. And you're able to sock a lot more money into retirement during those years, and hopefully kind of build the nest egg back up and still be able to, get to a good retirement. So hopefully that's the thought, right? The theory. But again, just like with the business thing, just interesting statistics, interesting things to kind of keep an eye on. Okay, and then this is kind of interesting. The CFPB proposes a rule to crack down on data brokerage. So the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau proposed a rule that would clarify and limit how data brokers can use consumers' financial data. More data brokers have emerged that collect and sell sensitive and private information about consumers, which could threaten a consumer's personal safety. The proposed rule would enforce regulations under the Fair Credit Reporting Act on data brokers. So they proposed a rule on Tuesday that would limit data brokers' access to consumers' financial data. The CFPB defines data brokers as companies that collect, aggregate, sell, or share information about consumers such as credit, criminal, and rental histories. Creditors, insurers, employers, and marketers often use the information collected by data brokers to make decisions about consumers. So when Congress passed the FRCA in 1970, it was one of the first data privacy laws in the world and protected consumer privacy. Now, more data brokers have emerged that avoid regulations outlined in the FRCA and collect and sell information about consumers, often without their consent, the CFPB said. And then, of course, obviously, consumer information is highly sensitive. What the proposal rule would do. So national consumer reporting agencies like Equifax, TransUnion, Experian, and some other data brokers are already covered under the FCRA. However, other data brokers have avoided the regulations set up by the FRCA and argue that they are not consumer reporting agencies. The proposed rules by the CFPB would clarify the definition of a consumer report, which would include collections of personal identifiers such as name, address, date of birth, social security number, and phone number. Data brokers who sell consumer reports would be considered CRAs and face regulations under the FCRA. The proposed rule would also clarify that consumer report information can only be used to stop identity theft or fraud, or in cases where law enforcement would need the reports for criminal investigations. While this data can be used to detect fraud, it can also be used to perpetuate fraud. Chohit Kapra, CFPB director, said in a conference call, Congress crafted the Fair Credit Reporting Act to ensure that law enforcement personnel have the data they need to work criminal investigations and pursue those at home and abroad who break the law. Currently, the CRFA allows the use of consumer reports if a company has a legitimate business need for the information. The proposal said marketing would not be considered a legitimate business need. So this gets really interesting because obviously you have some data brokers out there that are huge companies. They are massive companies, and they collect an insane amount of data on all of us. They basically run all over the web, basically what they call is scraping web pages to get, social media to get to basically garner as much information as they can on you, and then basically sell it back and sell that data for a profit. Now, again, they skirt the rules because they basically say that, hey, we're not providing a consumer report. We get companies like Apple and Facebook and all these other companies that come to us and basically want this consumer data, so they pay us for the data. And then off they go with it. So, and that's basically the situation of what's been happening. Hopefully, this is one of the few things that the CFPB done that I actually agree with. I think they should crack down on these data brokers. And I really think there should be a point where they basically say, you know what, not only do all these companies need to come under regulation, the type of information they're collecting needs to come into question as well. So hopefully this is just a first step in what will be, hopefully better regulation on this end as we go forward. So, okay. Now, I want to switch gears. Let me just see. Let me hold on here for a second. I need to take a swig for a second here as we're going on. Okay. I want to get in. What do I want to spend the rest of our time here doing over the next half hour? I want to get into some articles, basically giving you guys some bank data, some information that's going on there. I had some other news that I wanted to share with you. I wanted to go through, and I'm going to wrap up, like I said, with going through a couple of recent books that I just came across that I'm going to be doing some book reviews on over the next, couple months here. And then I want to end with succession planning, basically a bank director blog on what banks should be doing with succession planning. And then basically I'm just going to close out just talking about some of the episodes that I have up there, and then some of the episodes that will be coming out here in the next couple of weeks. Okay, so let's go rapid fire here. So let's jump in. Okay. So U.S. bank M&A set to boom as deal makers see a now or never window with Trump's return. So mergers and acquisitions in the U.S. are likely to boom following the return of President-elect Donald Trump to the White House as companies take advantage of a more favorable regulatory environment, according to one of the country's leading investment bankers. Speaking at the Financial Times Global Banking Summit in London, Fernando Rivas, co-CEO of corporate and investment banking at Wells Fargo & Company, said the Biden administration's obstructive approach to large-scale M&A since 2021 has created pent-up demand for deals. Trump's promises to slash regulation and create more business-friendly environment have built hopes among corporations that big-ticket M&A will soon be possible. People do feel like it may be now or never because you don't know who the next administration is going to be, said Rivas. And if they bring back the same policies after Trump leaves office, it may be 4, 8, 12 years before you could do a meaningful transaction again. It's pretty dour, right? Pretty downtrodden. like man, like it is now or never, baby. Yeah, no, I think this is good. I think hopefully the M&A market will spur, and we'll have a couple better years here over the next few years, and we'll see what happens. But again, it's good to see this because it gives you kind of an idea as to what's going to happen, what's going to transpire next year. I think a lot of banks have been waiting, and we can go down to, I do have a couple of articles on basically like bank stocks. Yeah, so these are two interesting things that kind of tie into this. Basically, the stock market, the fear gauge, or otherwise known as the VIX, basically it plunges. Investors expect rally to persist into 2025. So a key measure of fear in the stock market has fallen to its lowest levels in months, even as questions about the incoming Trump administration swirl. Geopolitical uncertainty stays elevated, and the economic path forward appears to be filled with hurdles. So here we can see here, this is a chart of the VIX. Which is basically the fear gauge on Wall Street. You could say it has basically trended down. We did have that spike up in, looked like about early August. We had a spike up to about 40, which isn't good. Usually you want to see this thing hanging around like somewhere between 15 and 20, which is where it's kind of been at. But now it's plunged down to below 15, which is pretty low. That's pretty good. And then you can see here the S&P 500 has surged to record highs throughout 2024. You can see again, nice steady chart there for the year, just going cruising right on up, going from about 4750 crossing over that 6,000 line, which is pretty amazing. And so basically, traders think that this market will continue into 2025, which is good news. And then we also had 2024 bank stock performance remarkable, even with some recent underperformance. So U.S. bank stock performance in 2024 remains robust, even as the industry underperformed the broader market in the last week. So the KBW NASDAQ Bank Index fell 2.5%, while the S&P 500 rose 1.5% during the week, ended December 4th. But in 2024, through that date, the KBW NASDAQ Bank Index is up 40.4% in 2024, while the S&P 500 is up 27.6%. Piper Sandler analyst Mark Fitzgibbons wrote on a December 2nd research note that 2024 bank stock performance has been nothing short of remarkable. In fact, many of our bank dedicated clients have recently suggested to us that they wish they could end the year right now. Clearly, the elections played a sizable role in juicing recent performance. Since the November election, bank stocks have performed similarly to how they did in the wake of the 2016 election, according to an analysis by Raymond James analyst Daniel Tomeo. In the 17 days following the election, the KBW NASDAQ Bank Index rose 12.3%, while the S&P 500 rose 4.3%, compared to a respective 19% and 2.4% increases in the 17 days following the 2016 election. Additionally, some generalist investors are looking to invest in banks that have not fully participated in the recent rally, Fitzgibbons wrote. As such, the analyst compiled a list of 17 banks to assist these investors, including Bank OZK and Pacific Premier Bank Corp. kind of, and then it just has some chart here, kind of the best and the worst performing U.S. bank stocks. Chainbridge Bancorp, best performing stock last week. Pathfinder Bancorp, worst performing stock last week. And then a bunch of ones in the middle. But I think, what is the takeaway here from this between these last three articles? So you basically see that bank stocks are doing very well. They've been kind of juiced here in the last 17 days. They think the rally, is going to continue into next year. The VIX is dropping, and bankers basically see a now or never moment, basically coming up here in the next year or so. So they basically see a point where M&A activity will pick up. And hopefully that will be very good for the industry at large. But okay, let's take a look at a couple other things here. So broker deposits, as BAAS institutions increased in the third quarter as scrutiny continues to heighten. Broker deposits as a banking as a service institutions increased at a time when regulators are zeroing in on financial technology space. BAS institutions' broker deposits amounted to $20.68 billion in the third quarter, a period in which the FDIC proposed a rule that would require banks to count more fintech-like deposits as brokered instead of core. I'll talk a lot more about that in other episodes. But basically, you can just see here that broker deposits at BAS institutions since the first quarter of 2020, so still going up a little bit, but it is kind of definitely plateaued a little bit in the last year or so, and we'll have to continue to keep an eye on this. But I want to run through some other things. I want to keep kind of rolling here. So U.S. housing market. Home price growth slowed in September of 2024. So U.S. home price growth slowed in September, though pricing overall remained elevated. So prices remained pretty decent. Nothing really catastrophic happening here. Prices continue to kind of inch their way up. You can see from the chart there. Nothing too crazy going on there. U.S. banks' efficiency ratios decreased slightly in the third quarter. So after improving for 2 quarters, U.S. banks' efficiency ratios flattened out in the third quarter. The industry's aggregate efficiency ratio of 56.41% was just 1 basis point up from the second quarter and 80 basis points up from the third quarter of 2023. So again, that's good. That means that basically banks' efficiency ratios are pretty much right where they should be. Good for the industry as a whole. That's good. Commercial real estate worries fading even as delinquencies mount. That's kind of interesting, right? It's a little bit of an oxymoron there, right? Concerns about commercial real estate credit stress appear to have subsided amid the post-election rally in bank stocks, even as delinquencies have continued to move higher. Loans that were 30 days or more past due increased 7 basis points sequentially to 1.48% of total commercial real estate loans across U.S. banks in the third quarter. A rebound in medium-term interest rates since September is keeping one source of pressure on borrowers in play. Yet banks have taken steps to protect themselves by pulling back on CRE lending and building loss reserves, and conditions in troubled CRA sectors like office do not appear to have deteriorated further in recent periods by some measures. While industry credit metrics have clearly ticked higher, actual credit losses have remained historically low, and banks appear to be well reserved relative to the current risk factors. Maybe. I would say this. I think that there is a high probability that, I've talked before about how banks are facing what's called the maturity wall. And because of what they've been doing with a practice called extend and pretend, and this maturity wall is basically coming up, and it's going to hit really hard in 25, 26, and it's going to peak in 27. So you have 3 years. So I can assure you that delinquency and charge-offs on commercial real estate loans are going to increase over the next couple of years. Have banks build up loan loss reserves? They have. Have they built up as much as they should? Probably not. And, so that's going to lead to issues. I think the biggest issue for banks is interest rates. If the interest rates continue to come down, banks will probably be okay. The carnage will probably be averted. If interest rates do not come back down over the next year or so, you are going to start to see some major problems. There are probably some banks that will fail because they will have a boatload of bad loans on their books that they will not be able to unload, as a lot of banks have done in more recent quarters throughout this year. They have basically dumped a lot of their bad loans with the rise of what's called private credit, and I've kind of talked about that a lot. But anyway, let's keep rolling here. So, number of U.S. banks with TCE ratios below 5% in the quarter three is the lowest since the first quarter of 2022. So, the number of U.S. banks with adjusted tangible common equity ratios below 5% fell in the third quarter to the lowest level since the first quarter of 2022, significantly down from the prior quarter and the third quarter of 2022's peak. On September 30th, 136 U.S. banks had adjusted tangible common equity (TCE) ratios below 5%, down from 259 at the end of the second quarter as rates fell. Fed rate hikes contributed to widespread TCE ratio depression in the second quarter of 2022. The ratio began to normalize in the third quarter of 2023 prior to the most recent quarter's improvement. And what does it say here? So why do we look at this? Well, it says here, the adjusted tangible common equity ratio attempts to measure the amount of capital available to banks after factoring in unrecognized changes in market valuations and potential credit losses. So this goes right into the real estate thing. It is calculated by taking a bank's tangible common equity, adding in loss reserves and unrealized gains or losses from held to maturity securities tax adjusted at the 21% corporate tax rate, subtracting non-performing assets and loans 90 days or more days delinquent, but still accruing interest, and then dividing by tangible assets. So in other words, this basically looks at, okay, what is the impact on a bank's capital, basically after you take a hit for loan losses, for basically loans that get written off, but not just that, but also the bank's investment portfolio. And I've talked extensively about how banks have a chasm in what you call unrealized losses on their bond portfolios. And that has been a drag on the industry for the last 18 months and is continuing to be a drag on the industry. So basically, having the TCE ratio drop here is not a good thing. That's not really where you want banks to be. And it basically tells you that the banks, like I said, if the delinquency continues to increase on commercial, particularly on commercial real estate, a lot of banks are going to have problems, and you are going to have a number of banks that are going to go bust. That's what's going to happen if interest rates do not continue to come down, because banks need that to basically bail them out of the whole on both sides of that coin, on both in both the bond portfolio with the unrealized gains. They need the help with the interest rates on that, and in the credit portfolio with their commercial real estate loans. So it's both sides of the not both sides of the balance sheet, but basically on the asset side of the balance sheet. They need to help with the assets. Okay. Originations of 1 to 4 family mortgages reached 2-year peak. 1 to 4 family mortgage originations in the U.S. moved higher in the third quarter and reached their highest level since the third quarter of 2022. So during the period, originations in the wholesale category increased to $54.73 billion from $44.58 billion in the second quarter, according to an S&P Global Market Intelligence analysis. Retail originations were $46 billion. Up from $44.56 billion in the second quarter. So we could see here, retail originations, wholesale originations, and then year-over-year change. Still not fantastic. I mean, you look at where things were back in 19 and 20, and you look at where they are now. It's just, still not. Might have ticked up a little bit, but still not all that great. So, U.S. banks' construction loan delinquency climbs in the third quarter. So the delinquency ratio for construction loans at U.S. banks rose sequentially in the third quarter as banks' overall construction loans fell. So delinquent residential construction loans rose to $1.06 billion, or 1.2% of total residential loans, from roughly $934 million, or 1% of total residential loans a quarter earlier. So so basically what's happening here is that the delinquency on construction loans is going up, but banks are really reining in the amount of construction loans. Like, they're really pulling back on the amount of construction loans that they're making. So that will help them to kind of keep this delinquency in check, so to speak, over time. But it also means a reduction in construction activity, because it means that construction loans are going to be harder to get. unless you're Toll Brothers or NV Homes or one of the big players. It's going to be get harder and harder to basically finance your construction projects, at least in the short term, 6 to 12 months. Okay, U.S. banks' high volatility commercial real estate loans fall in the third quarter of 2024. So, U.S. banks' high volatility commercial real estate loans fell sequentially and year over year in the third quarter. So, what is this? What is a high volatility commercial real estate loan? This is construction loans. This is land loans. And like I said, banks are pulling back again. They're pulling back in this category. Because they see the delinquency creeping up. They see the delinquency taking off. So now they're pulling the reins in. They're pulling back on this. So, okay, what else do we have here? Okay, that was the VIX. That was the stock performance. And then just a couple other articles here. Valley National Bank, they sold $925 million of commercial real estate loans to Brookfield. Again, private credit dumping off some loans here. Fintechs, the biggest threat to Santander's profitability, the CFO says. So the CFO of Santander Bank basically says fintechs and similar businesses disrupting financial services through technology are the biggest threat to Santander's profitability. Recent entrants to the market are successfully targeting specific business lines of traditional banking groups with more attractive digital platforms. The non-traditional banks, the new payment companies, fintechs, neobanks through technology, they have been able to break into pieces the different value chains, and they are attacking parts of the value chain. He said when asked what he believed the biggest challenge to Santander's profitability was, they are clearly making a lot of what we do obsolete. So then he talks about cutting costs. He talks about what they're doing is not enough. And he says, we have become too complex. We need to simplify. We need to operate through common platforms, app processes, and we need to change the core banking system, both the back end and the front end. Unless we are able to do that, we won't be able to compete. I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with that statement. Again, and why do I say that? Because I've been in banking for over 24 years, and my entire time in that 24 years of banking, I've heard these exact same comments, these exact same sentiments. And, and banks do a much better job today than they did 20 years ago, 25 years ago, in terms of technology. The core providers have gotten much better. Banks have gotten much more savvy with the type of technology they need and what they need to be competitive in the marketplace, what the customers are demanding from a digital experience, from a product experience. So, and banks continue to work on this stuff all the time. It's not like it's not a static environment. I mean, banks continue to work all the time to try to get better at this. So again, and I'm not saying his remarks are untrue. There definitely is a lot of truth to what he's saying there. I just don't think it's as dire as maybe what some of those comments make it out to be. Anyway. Okay, TD Bank suspends guidance, provides update on anti-money laundering remediation. So TD Bank suspended medium-term guidance and outlined its plans for remediating its anti-money laundering program. In October, the company reached a roughly $3.09 billion resolution to regulators' orders related to anti-money laundering and entered plea agreements with the U.S. Justice Department. During a call on December 5th to discuss earnings, TD said it is suspending medium-term adjusted earnings per share growth, return on equity, and operating leverage targets. That's going to do wonders for their stock, by the way. The company expects to give updates in the second half of 2025. So TD Bank basically had this giant anti-money laundering, just hot mess at their bank. They got fined a record amount of money. Basically fired a bunch of people, forced a whole bunch of people into retirement, and now they're going to have this lovely asset cap that they're going to have to deal with. Basically the same thing that Wells Fargo has had to deal with since the whole sales scandal that unfolded there a few years back. And then, this is kind of interesting. This last article I have here. So this says Insurance Insight. So rapidly shrinking Citizens property projects' largest full-year underwriting losses. So what this is basically Florida's residential and commercial property insurer of last resort on December 4th will present a 2025 operating budget that suggests considerable progress toward shrinking its overall exposure, but not before its 2024 financial results show a significant impact from several landfall-making hurricanes. So, what's interesting in Florida, if you're not familiar with the Florida market, if you don't live in Florida, Florida basically, because of a lot of the hurricanes and different things that have happened down there, a lot of insurance providers have pulled out of the state. So it became very difficult to get property and flood insurance. And one of the things that Florida did to try to tackle this was they created this Citizens Property Insurance Corp, which is my understanding is basically a company that's owned by the state of Florida to provide property insurance and to homeowners. And basically, I think it's almost like half of the property owners in Florida now get their property insurance through this basically the fund through this company. So it's just kind of an interesting thing to look at. So like I said, this fund had really kind of taken it on the chin. They had to get emergency funding, I think, about a year or so ago to basically keep the fund alive and keep it going. So, which was kind of interesting. So, just like I said, just kind of interesting information, something interesting to keep an eye on. If you have, I would say if you operate a business in Florida, or if you have family members that live there or operate a business there, might be something interesting to keep an eye on or take a look at. So, okay. All right. So what do I got here? Last couple minutes, I want to go over a couple of things here. So I want to pull this back for just a second. And now, okay, 3 books that I recently came across here that I wanted to share with everybody. So this was called, and I know there's a glare there a little bit, but this is called The Top 10 Reasons the Rich Go Broke. And I was kind of intrigued. I looked at this book. I was kind of intrigued, and kind of just different general reasons why rich people basically lose their money. And I thought, that's always a fascinating topic. And I think there was another book called The Psychology of Money that came out a couple of years ago that was a really good book because it went into kind of behavioral finance, but it did it like this book does through telling stories, using different stories as examples to basically show you why people do certain things with their money. So I definitely want to cover this. I want to cover that book, The Psychology of Money, because I think people will find some really interesting takeaways from these 2 books and some of the different stories that they offer about why people do different things, with their money. Fascinating book here. Jim Rickards. This is his brand new book that just came out. It's called Money GPT AI and the Threat to the Global Economy. What I love about Jim Rickards basically wrote the national bestseller called Currency Wars. And Jim Rickards is a fascinating individual. And if you ever get a chance to just look up his profile and read his background, he basically did wargaming, basically financial wargaming for the State Department for many years. And he's basically thus his first book, Currency War, was basically all about financial wargaming and how this country uses tariffs, this country increases taxes, this country changes some laws, this country does this country does that. It plays games with their currencies, like China with currency devaluation. How does that play out? Almost like a 4D chess game. And like I said, in his mind, I think when he breaks some of this stuff down for you, he looks at this from a perspective that you rarely, if never get anywhere else. And that's why I loved his book, Currency Wars. And now he's kind of bringing that same kind of war game mentality to AI. And basically, what is AI going to mean? What does AI really mean to the financial services industry? What is it going to mean for banks and hedge funds and private equity firms and stock markets? And how can this basically war game scenario with AI being used to kind of attack and manipulate markets? And he gives some really interesting scenarios in the book about like, well, what would happen if AI was used to attack the stock market? What would AI, AI basically having different companies attack each other? Like, I mean, some really, really cool and interesting scenarios that he proposes in this book. So I definitely look forward to covering that. And then I also came across Tom Wheelwright's an author, has written a couple of these books now. This is called Tax-Free Wealth, and this is the third edition. Now, I would put a caveat on this. This book was written, I think, at the beginning of this year. And was this written at the beginning of this year? Or maybe it was the beginning of last year. I think it might have been last year. Might have been 2023. So this book is maybe about 2 years old at this point. But again, I was looking for hopefully some tax. I read the first couple volumes of the book, and there actually were some good, tax information, some good tax tidbits in there. So I was hoping to maybe find a couple things in there that I might be able to share with everybody. So those are some of the business books I'm looking at right now, as well as some of the other business books that I'm bringing in. Some of the books that I wanted to cover, I'm actually going to be covering in the new financial history series, which I'm going to be basically going to be rolling out. That I actually decided I was thinking about rolling that out, but I continue to try to make some changes to it, some different things I'm going to do with that, and I'm going to roll that out in January. After I wanted to start the new year, because I'm going to do that as 12 episodes. We're going to cover basically the 20th century to start with, and we're going to cover major things that happened financially throughout the 27, like the panic in 1907, the Great Depression. We're going to go into like Bretton Woods. We're going to go into like when Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1971. The market Black Monday in October of 1986, the early recession of 1990, the savings and loan crisis. Like, we're going to go into all of these kind of major financial moments throughout the 20th century, and basically how that has impacted our lives, and basically the big takeaways we can get from that. So hopefully people will find that series interesting. And so, like I was saying, that there was a number of books within that series that I wanted to do book reviews on, but I've been waiting because the book reviews are going to be part of that series. So like, basically how that series is going to work is that every episode, we're going to do one episode a month, and every episode is good. It won't necessarily be a full book review, but we're going to use a book to kind of guide the conversation for each episode. So that way, basically, if you want to learn more on the topic, we give the book. You can go get the book and read the book on your own, that kind of thing. But we'll cover the main points, or the gist, if you will, of each book, and we'll use things in that book to kind of guide the conversation. That's kind of how that series is gonna work, and is gonna roll out. So but okay, so that's what I got there. And then I just want to read this piece on succession. So basically, this is called Don't Fumble This Ball. So, and this is on bank succession. I thought this was interesting. So it's the board's duty to ensure the bank has the right leaders at the top. That's executed through regular performance evaluations, setting expectations, and an effective succession planning process. But unfortunately, boards often fumble the ball on CEO succession, delaying what many directors consider an uncomfortable conversation. Roughly half of bank CEO departures over the past decade have been abrupt or otherwise unplanned, according to recent research from Russell Reynolds Associates that examined CEO transitions at U.S. regional banks between $20 billion and $250 billion in assets. 24% of CEOs retired without public mention of a CEO succession plan. Some left for personal reasons or professional reasons, or were removed. The market doesn't like uncertainty, and the stock for those banks declined an average of 8% a month after the announcement, according to the report. This drop in market value affects shareholder returns, employee morale, and customer perception, wrote Robert Voth, who leads the North American consumer and commercial financial services practice at the executive search firm and leadership advisory firm. Done well, Voth sees succession planning that aligns with executive development as something leaders can celebrate. It helps banks retain a promising executive when another institution tries to lure them away. Executives see that the company is thinking futuristically, he says, not only about the succession of the company, but the success of the executives. Voth encourages boards to think deeply about the talent in their C-suite and recommends that directors receive a regular in-depth review roughly every 18 months of internal talent, as well as potential external candidates who could fill key spots. On a quarterly basis, the bank's human resources officer should review progress on the succession plan and executive development with the committee tasked with succession planning, which is often the compensation committee. Voth adds that plans should consider time horizons of 2 to 5 years. That means discussions about succession should start early, long before the CEO or other key executives think they'll step down. That will make the conversation easier since it's just a normal part of the board's business. A forward-leaning or experienced CEO, a good CEO will want succession plan discussions, Voth said. That will energize her or his team, and it will allow for open discussion of the future of the company. So I think this is very interesting. I think succession planning is very important. It's very critical. But it is not something that a lot of banks do well. And you have to ask yourself the question, why might a successful CEO not want a succession plan? Well, obviously, if there is an heir apparent and there's somebody in place, should they make any kind of a misstep, that might lead the board to basically say, hey, Bob's done a great job for us, but you know what? His time is kind of passed him by, and maybe we need to go to the new young person that maybe Sally, who we've been grooming for 10 years over here. She's ready to take the reins, and, we need to just, shove Bob out, but maybe Bob's not quite ready to go yet, but he may not have a choice in the matter. That is why, if you've ever seen the show on, what was it, with the HBO show Succession, that show's a little, that's a little extreme. If you've seen the show, you know what I'm talking about. But it kind of gets to the point of like some of the battles that can happen if you have an heir apparent in the wings or in waiting. We have seen many such corporate situations where people get tired of waiting. The person at the top just changes their mind; they don't want to go. But like you said, to the point of the article here, when you don't do this, it has a lot of negative ramifications. The stock price can get hurt, employee morale can drop, confidence in the company can go down. Customers, vendors can get shaken by okay, what are they doing? What's going on? What's happening over there? So it is a big thing, and I think that corporate CEO succession planning is something I will definitely be talking about in the future. I just thought that this was an interesting piece to kind of end on and bring up here at the end. So I'll wrap up with that. So I did take off a little bit last week. I did do a live stream last weekend, but I did not have any episodes come out during the week this week like I normally do. And I do have slated for this week. Let me find this real quick. So I'm going to be doing a great article I found on AI and bank board members. Basically, is AI risk keeping bank board members up at night? I wanted to do Bernie Marcus, who was one of the co-founders of Home Depot. He passed away this week, so I'm doing an episode kind of just going over his life and kind of honoring him a little bit. Student borrowers have problems. The CFPB recently released 2 reports on basically all the challenges that student borrowers are currently facing, so I wanted to review those. I wanted to check in on credit unions. How are credit unions doing right now? There's some interesting information about the credit union performance and mergers and acquisitions and stuff that came out that I wanted to detail. And then finally, I had I'm going to have the latest installment of the crypto series, which is the Trump effect on crypto. And we'll be talking about kind of the increase in Bitcoin. We'll be talking about what's going on with crypto miners, whether a new report that came out that basically does instability in the crypto market bring instability to the to our regular financial system. I think absolutely it will. But like I said, those are the episodes I have coming out this week. I hope everybody will check them out when they get a minute. And basically I'll wrap up and basically just say, and like I said, and I am trying, and I'll put a call to action out to everybody right now. So I am trying to get to 1,000 subscribers. So I went over 250. I was very happy to be over 250. It's been great considering I've only been doing this for like a little over a year now. But I would really love to get up to 1,000 subscribers. So if you like what you're seeing from the channel, like the information I'm bringing you, please try to share the channel, get the message out, help me spread the word organically if possible to just get the word out. And like I said, I really want to try to make that push to try to get up to 1,000 subscribers and kind of roll from there, because I got a lot of great plans for things that I want to do with this podcast over the next couple of years. And so that's, like they said, that's my call to action. Spread the good word, if you will. Spread the good word. But like I said, if you like this, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe, as that really helps the channel. Please make sure to leave your comments down below. As I always love getting back to everybody. Check out some of the other content on the channels. I have some great episodes out there, and I will see everybody again real soon. Like I said, all new episodes coming out this week. I'll be back next Saturday night for another Strategy Room live stream. Thank you again for being in the Strategy Room. Thank you for spending this time with me. Now get out of here and go watch the end of the Penn State game. So thanks, everybody. See you later.